Okay, so now that you're all prepared and you have your folders and the papers inside and everybody's got together, I want you to look on the board and you're going to see that I wrote the word fear there. Now, if you were in the last class with me, you know why I wrote the word fear based on what we were talking about. So, obviously, the unit that we're working on, Unit 5, is on facing our fears. And we all know that sometimes these fears are real fears, and sometimes these fears are imaginary fears. And when we look at the Salem witch trial, it's real fears. People were afraid that they were going to be put to death, but they were based on, not imaginary fears, spectral evidence, the belief that people were witches or warlocks, those types of things. But that's terrifying to think that no matter what you say or no matter what you do, you can't get out of it in society and something's going to happen to you because of it. And so when we look at fear, we have to look at those things. And then, of course, I told you about me staying in the Lizzie Borden house, which is supposedly one of the most haunted places in America. And was that real? The things that I experienced there, or was that psychological? Who knows? You'd have to go there and find out for yourself. But when we look at fear, I've said this to you guys before, I believe, but I'm 53 years old this year. And because of this societal conditioning towards fear, like in horror movies and things like that, um, you know, I'm still afraid of certain things because society and artists have made me afraid of them. So, a couple things. So, when you're looking at horror movies, think about horror movies that you've seen. Most of you do watch them, some of you don't, but most of you do. They put certain elements in horror movies that we know when we hear that or see that, something's going to happen, right? So, if I was in class with you, I'd be asking you to throw them out, but I'm just gonna tell you a few. So, music in horror movies, and any of my musicians that are in my period 6 or period 8 class, I bow to you. Music really makes a horror film terrifying. Think about Jaws. Okay, now I saw Jaws when I was like 12, 13 years old. That's when it came out. Okay, so I saw it in the movie theater. And I remember how scary that composition was for the shark. And the fact that it was only two repetitive notes, but based on the speed, or the retard of the speed, you knew that the shark was there and that it was coming for you. Ba-dum, ba-dum. There's the shark. And then you hear it bum ba ba da 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 ba-dum ba-dum ba 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 da 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 da. And you were like, oh my God, it's coming, get out of the water, screaming at the screen, trying to make the characters get away. Even though everything in you knows that in horror movies like that, because that is a horror movie, okay? In horror movies like that, you know what's going to happen. Now, the, unrealistic part of the fear is that when I saw that, even though I knew that it was completely not logical that in my backyard swimming pool, which is 25 feet long, which was the length of the shark in Jaws, okay, I couldn't swim in it at night for months after seeing Jaws. I was absolutely sure that that giant shark was going to find a way up that small drain hole and get in my pool. But the funny thing is even if it did, if the pool's 25 feet in length and the shark's 25 feet in length, it wouldn't have even been able to move. But it didn't matter. It's not rational. It's psychological, okay? And that's what horror stories are really good at doing, is psychologically messing us up. Think about it. I mean, I still am looking down at the drain going, there's not a clown coming out of it, is it? At 53. And I've also told you when I sleep, I can't sleep with my arm or my foot hanging off the bed. Even if I'm asleep and I'm comfortable, I will actually move my arm or my foot back onto the bed because I don't want anything to get me. Okay, so it's logic is not in this situation, logic does not win because you've been psychologically conditioned over the years to be horrified by these triggers in horror movies. So music's one of them. The movie Psycho, where the girl's in the shower and somebody comes with a knife. Same thing, a long sustain of the music, and then when the knife comes in, and you're like, ah. So music really conditions us to know that something bad's about to happen in a horror movie. Usually, when the music comes in, we know something's going to go down. The other thing that you notice in horror movies, and they're starting to break this now today, you'll see them breaking, especially like in movies like The Visit or The Grudge. But the tradition is that you can be somewhere during the daytime, an isolated farmhouse out in the middle of nowhere, an abandoned city building, in the middle of the city. And in the daytime, you're going to be completely fine. But then what happens? Night comes and all hell breaks loose, right? That's when everything goes down. So a lot of times they'll use lighting, to set the mood, the settings to set the mood. And we know this. And, there's movies where somebody will open a door and then there's like this crazy staircase going to nowhere. And, we're all in the movie theater or in the classroom where we're watching it going, no, don't go in there. And when they do, we're like, oh, I can't believe they just went in there, because we know something's going to happen. So that's one of the things when you're reading horror stories or you're watching horror films, where those things are going to happen. Sometimes they do jump starts where you don't think anything's going to happen and then they shock you and everybody jumps. So there's all these different elements in horror, that you look at. And your mind loves to play tricks on you. Your imagination loves to play tricks on you. I may have said this to you, I'm not sure, but I'm going to repeat it if I did. There's this great scene in Rugrats. I used to watch Rugrats all the time with Dylan, but there's this great scene in Rugrats, and I don't remember which episode it was, but it's Chucky and Tommy, and they're together in the backyard. And Tommy says to Chucky, why don't you just use your imagination? And Chucky says, oh no, Tommy, my imagination's a scary place. I never go in there alone. And that's probably the most profound thing that I've ever heard from a cartoon. But as Compass students, as creatives, that our imagination can get the better of us. And therefore, we can create all of these crazy scenarios. And then when you look at how society has backed up our crazy ideas with horror stories and horror films, then why when your door's cracked at night and you see just a black sliver of dark, you're freaking out. And you don't want to walk to the kitchen to get a glass of water, or you don't want to go down a hallway, or you don't want to go up a stairwell. Now, that's psychological terror. Okay, that's that type of fear. But there's another type of fear that we all have, which is instinctual. Okay, and that's when our gut tells us, don't do it. Don't go there. Sometimes you may be walking by somebody in the street and you just get a bad feeling. Or you see a car go by with somebody in it and you get a bad feeling. But something in your gut tells you don't do something or don't go down this certain alley or whatever. And that's not, a false fear. That is yourself, your body, your mind instinctively protecting you against danger. And most of the time, your gut is not wrong. And it's always good to follow that instinct. The only time your gut is wrong is if it's a phobia. And a phobia is, a fear of something that you really shouldn't be afraid of. One of the most common phobias that I know of is people that are afraid of flying. Okay, and which is totally crazy. I mean, if you ever looked at the radar of how many planes are flying every day from every airport across the world, you would see how irrational this fear is. But people do, they'll be like, I can't get on that plane, it's stressing me out. And then unfortunately what happens is their gut is telling them the wrong thing. It's completely safe to get on the plane. But because they've psychologically worked themselves up about it, or media has shown them images or films that have upset them about, fear of flying, they won't get on. And unfortunately, with phobias, the more you choose to not get on like a plane, or the more you choose to show that fear, it cements the phobia and it makes it worse. Okay, so that it makes it more powerful. So in a phobia situation, getting on a plane if you're afraid, public speaking if you're afraid, those types of things, you want to do it because each time you do it and you realize that you're fine, the phobia releases you. And each time you give in, the phobia gets worse. So, those are the things that we need to think about in this fear, facing our fears in this unit. What's real? What's not real? What's just psychological terror of our own? And so I want you to think about those things today as you're working. Now, I'm going to stop this video here. And what I want you to do is I want you to take a moment and I want you to turn to somebody next to you. It can be a partner, you can be a tripod, you can be a quad, but I want to make sure that everybody's engaged in the room, okay? And I want you to share with somebody a time when you were really afraid, either in a movie, an unrealistic fear, a phobia, or like a moment that something really fearful happened to you. Take a moment and share with somebody. And I want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. So Mr. Strusma, probably partway through, like I'd say like 5 minutes, maybe about 2.5 minutes in, go ahead and, give them a heads up that everybody should, have spoken. But I want you guys to take a minute and I want you to think about a time that you were afraid, that you were fearful, and share it with somebody. And then when I come back, I'm going to ask you to share it with me. So let's do that and then we'll move on to the book work. Okay?